So, good afternoon, everybody, to today's GRIDtalk. Fantastic to see many familiar faces already coming in from the waiting room. Per normal, lots to cover, so we'll get straight into it. Before we sort of get into this sort of intro, just to familiarize people with the Livestorm environment, you'll see over, hopefully to your bottom right, two aspects, chat and questions. So if any of this agitates any kind of commentary, please throw that into the chat. Some of my colleagues will be monitoring, and particularly if you've got a question, put that in as we go, and you can sort of upvote those questions as well. So as always, we try and leave a chunk of time towards the end, and we'll then go to the question section of the panel then. But yeah, and just to say right up front, we've got my colleague Mark, who I'm going to intro in a minute, and also Tom, who's running the HQ slide deck. So Tom, if you can click forward. Just to say, for some of you will be completely new faces. I can see a number of familiar faces coming in, but some of you also new to the series. We typically run these every 4 weeks or so. The final one in the 23 series in December is going to be a bit of a reflection on the year, both from the lens of the platform team and also from the professional services team, what we've learned, through the privilege of working with so many fantastic clients, and what that infers going forward. Particularly, I look at our sort of product roadmap that Jodie will be taking people through in that session. So that's one just to finish the year off with. If you keep going, Tom. So as I say, today you've got Mark and myself, myself, the CEO of Method Grid, and I'm going to let Mark introduce himself. So Mark, over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Mark. I'm senior developer here at Method Grid. I'm also involved in research at Durham University, for my PhD in AI explainability. While we're just plugging things at the beginning, I'm actually doing a talk next week on Tuesday at the MDE Net conference down in London. We'll be talking about some of the work we've been doing with Durham University around AI explainability. But that's next week. Now we're talking about lessons learned.
Great.
Let's get into it.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. But also just to, if you click forward, Tom, just to situate us, again, for those that are completely new, and I recognize a lot of you are very familiar, but just sort of 60 seconds on where we are, just so you've at least got some context on the discussion we're about to enter into. So, fundamentally, Method Grid, it's an AI-empowered knowledge and project management platform. We support organizations that are heavily projectized, that essentially, I guess the defining problem statement would be the variation of service deliverability on that topic is too broad, and a number of pain symptoms typically manifest when that is the case. Our sort of then, I guess, situational view on the world is where there's 4 key aspects, the pillars you see on this diagram, that sort of are a useful way of looking at this systematically. One is, firstly, to reduce variance, there has to clearly be a clarity around the methodological playbook, point 1. Point 2, once that's in place, there clearly has to be a culture and a kind of leadership-led compliance regime. As always, with busy portfolios, there will be a professional cohort. We need to think about how that integrates with the professional development of that professional body. And then finally, and particularly with the clients that we're working with, the nature of the end product is by itself risky. These are highly complex, multi-dimensional sort of requirements that we're building for clients, our final end clients, and by its nature, there's a lot of risk in that. So clearly, you can't take that away, you can't wish it away, but you can ameliorate it to the optimal extent with very structured assurance and audit process. So that's the kind of lens we have on the world. If we move forward, that kind of architecture, as it were, kind of goes right down into the nature of our platform. So in a very simple kind of version of that is, the platform is broken down into all things grid build, how we present and build playbooks and create clarity with methodological statement, how you can take that into delivery, and importantly, configure it contingent to the local circumstance. And that's a key part of the compliance take-up point. But effectively, you can use it as an assurance delivery enablement tool. You can assure an audit against that path, and then really importantly, all the collaboration that goes on allows you ultimately through delivery iteration to build and accrete best practice, continuous improvement into an ever improving master. And I say all that not as a sort of a sales pitch. Apologies if it sort of sounded like that. Really to situate this grid talk, and we almost use it as a roadmap. Each time we do a grid talk, quite often they're on one of those four, and we deep dive into it. In this instance, we have genuinely a topic that is going to be covering all of that sort of virtuous cycle, and hence why, well, A, it's so exciting, but B, it's also inherently challenging. But if you can click on, Tom. Just also to say right up front, as we get into this, there's two key sort of, knowledge artifacts or constructs that Mark and I are going to be describing. One is a white paper that is actually in draft form out in the world now. And a huge thank you to a number of clients and colleagues that have already given us feedback. I can see a number of you in the room, so thank you for that commentary back. But we will essentially be diving into that white paper in this grid talk. And then secondly, that the white paper touches on is the project that we are starting to now in early stage to define. We're calling it Project Leap. And essentially it's an industry collaboration we would love to be at the sort of fulcrum of that we kick off in earnest in 2024. So we're also going to give you a bit more on that. Tom. And if we frame it through those two, I guess the aims for today's grid talk are really twofold. From the white paper context to give you an overview of it at the very least. If it piques your curiosity and you'd like to see the full paper, we can't get into the full detail in an hour, then please reach out, grab a copy from us, and we would love to get any additional feedback before we publish it live in the new year. And then with respect to Project Leap, again, to give you an overview of the salient features of what we have in plan, and again, to court interest, because this very much is an industry wide collaboration that we're looking to get going. So they're the fundamental sort of aims for today. Click on, Tom. Okay, so how are we going to go about it? So a bit of a double act, Mark and myself. So you get the at least the variety of us both talking to this. So I'm going to hand over shortly to Mark, who's going to initially look at what we could really call lessons learned 1.0, and why is this something that we need to address? Why is it broken fundamentally? Point two, why does any of this matter? It could be an interesting topic, but not really worth the time and effort of lots of engaged minds, but we think it does matter. Point three, if you go into any kind of solution design, what are some of the key principles that you should take into account? And again, I think we're hugely fortunate that we've had dialogue with a number of you, and certainly at some of our senior user forums, this has been a hot topic, and I think we've had our first go at synthesizing what we think are going to be the key principles that guide this going forward. Point four, Mark is going to really get into why now. Why is it this point that certainly from a technology perspective, technology enablement perspective, why is this genuinely a very unique and exciting moment? And Mark's going to bring us right up to time, and this is moving by the week, so Mark's going to bring us right up to this date in that regard. Then we're going to get into what we are looking at as the solution type, and we're calling it Lessons Learned 2.0. And then finally, we're going to, as I say, get across Project Leap, scope, timeline, what we think it might be able to address, and fundamentally how to get involved. So I think at this point, Mark, over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Tom. If we go on to the next slide, yeah. So these are the sort of key areas where we think lessons learned as it's currently practiced doesn't work. So first one is about lesson capture, and actually this is very related to the next one, which is about lesson learned retrieval. They're sort of two sides of the same coin, where the way we capture lessons tends to be at very sort of prescriptive, predefined times, either at the end of a project of a specific milestone, we'll sit down, have a meeting, and capture some lessons. Now, the problem there is the thing we're talking about might have happened 6 months ago, and we can all sort of vaguely half remember it, and we're trying to remember what actually happened at the time, and maybe the people it actually happened to aren't here anymore, they're not working on the project. So inevitably, the lesson we capture it's not of the quality that it needs to be at. Similarly, with lessons learned retrieval, it tends to only happen at specific project milestones, usually at the start of a project, where we look back and say, what were the things that happened in previous projects. But again, if we're just talking about that at the beginning of a project, that might not be relevant for another 6 months, and the people it's relevant to might not be working on the project yet. So that's clearly a suboptimum time to be doing that. If we move on to the next one. Again, this is around the quality. It's related to what I've just been talking about. Inevitably, if there's this sort of gap in time between when we're talking about it and when it's relevant, that's going to suffer from quality. The other interesting one with this around the quality is that when you talk to sort of P3M practitioners about lessons learned, often what gets said is, we don't do it enough, we need to do it more. Whereas then when you go and talk to a data scientist about the same problem, they almost say the opposite, where it's sort of, there's too much data, or rather there's too much low quality data. And a big challenge then is how do we extract the high quality lessons, the specific, measurable, here's something we can do to improve our next project, from all the noise of, really vague sort of, let's do this better next time, that is ultimately meaningless. So next point is around the tools to support lessons learned. And currently there don't really exist these tools that, even if you want to go and examine the lessons that have been captured in the past because you think there might be something relevant to what you're working on now, there aren't really the tools that currently exist to support that, to enable that easy retrieval of lessons learned to what you're working on now. And finally, just about the technology and this is one of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute when we talk about why now, is the technology hasn't really been there, or hasn't really been used in a way that supports this sort of classification and tagging of lessons so that they can be searched, or so that they can be surfaced at the relevant time. Because, as a manual task of categorizing all of these things, it's prohibitively time consuming, so it just sort of doesn't really happen. And if we go to the next one, this is the thing that sort of underpins all of this, is cultural and behavioral barriers to practicing lessons learned. And I think there's two main things here. One is around the culture of competitiveness within an organization. If I view my colleagues or members of a different team within my organization almost as my competitors, well, if I've got some valuable insights that I've learned, I'm not going to share that with them. I'm going to hoard that knowledge. I'm not going to, within an organization, is that sort of knowledge sharing encouraged or not? And the second point is how do people within an organization react when someone tries to share a lesson? Because sometimes a lesson's a positive thing. I'm saying, oh, I did this and it went really well, let me share with you this really great thing I did. But often it's the opposite. It's, I've made a mistake and this went badly, and here's what I've learned. And if when I stand up and admit to that mistake, I get yelled at, next time that happens, I'm not going to want to share that because I don't want to get yelled at again. So that those sort of cultural barriers kind of underpin all of this. And that this sort of fundamentally is what we think the problem is. If we go on to the next slide, this is the same idea but sort of structured in a different way. And we're going to come back to this idea of this kind of lessons learned loop. Of down at the bottom here, we have the kind of user, and at the top we have our lessons learned repository. And going up the left side is around capturing the lesson. So the problems we currently have with capturing lessons are, as I've said, only happens at specific stages. The quality of it's hugely variable. There aren't really the tools in place. It tends to be manual categorization of lessons, which is prohibitively time consuming. And then down the right-hand side, we have this retrieval of lessons learned. Again, there aren't really the tools, the user interface to support it. The quality isn't really there in terms of retrieval. And again, tends to only happen at prescribed times, like the beginning of the project. And We're going to come back later to this idea of this lessons learned loop and how we think it can be improved. But this fundamentally is where we see it failing as it currently is. From
Great. So, why does any of this matter? And we're sort of at a really high level. The paper goes into much more detail here, but would posit for 3 kind of key reasons. Firstly, and again, absolutely the case with a number of our kind of key clients, that when you're involved in major infrastructure build, this is for ultimate end benefit that is very, very aligned with, certainly from a UK national perspective, stated long-term objectives. And you can see just some there, the levelling up agenda, the union strengthening agenda, the sustainable goals, net zero 2050. Anybody that saw the recent national infrastructure assessment, that's published every 5 years, or IPA's, TIP roadmap, you totally can see the line of sight between what is on the sort of the portfolio of major infrastructure build and how it links to some of these very, very strategic intents. So it's important stuff. Point 2 would be that from a pure economic perspective, this massively matters. A recent survey in, I think it was KPMG, some ONS data. If you take a sweep through the entire sort of architectural, engineering, construction kind of sector, and all the way down as it permeates down through the supply chain, it's certainly 300 bill plus, and that is a decent circa 9% chunk of the UK economy. And you can see there sort of 2.2 mil people in what is ultimately a very, very fragmented kind of supply chain, but economically, this is key. And then the third point is, well, all of those points could be kind of the case, but we could just be on top of this. And whilst, and again, the white paper goes into this, there are some mixed results here. There are some definite glimmers of hope, and there are some sort of data points that are hopeful and can demonstrate that there are some areas of productivity gain. The fundamental point is, there is a lot more to be done. And you can see that simple chart there. It's a KPMG chart that shows the productivity curve of the construction industry in the context of the overall economy and manufacturing. And it's a quantum kind of gap behind. And there is manifestly the case that there is a huge opportunity gap left on the sort of productivity topic. And whilst project management in and of itself is not the panacea, and indeed the lessons learned discipline as a subset is not the panacea, it can have a really material role to play in that continuous improvement, productivity enhancement pursuit that we are on. So it matters in our view. Okay, so if that being said, and you go into any kind of solution design, what things do we need to take into account? And this is an ongoing dialogue. We suspect there are probably others as well, but certainly from the benefit of the conversation we've had with many of you, and again, thanks again to everybody who's been involved in this, we think there's at least 6, or there'll no doubt be others, but 6 that are key. Is, well, firstly, you've got to recognize, to what Mark was talking about, there is a human reality to this, particularly where you've got private agents, you've got, frankly, profit maximization certainly leads to short-termism in a lot of cases. You have the sort of, the challenge of a lot of busy sort of, certainly, private companies, which is, our staff have got to be utilized, they're busy, they finish one project, they've got to race to the next. That is the reality. That isn't going to change, is the brutal point here. So you have to sort of build technology that works with that, not against that grain, but fundamentally recognizes that human sort of backdrop. Point 2, to this quality point, is that any enablement of this has got to try and qualitatively get to what is the root cause of lessons learned. I mean, there is a lot of experience already in this GRIDtalk. We've all been around the block in terms of working on big complex programs, but there is a whole load of content-free, sort of slightly vacuous, kind of stuff that ends up in lessons learned repositories, and we've got to kind of get to what is the genuinely first order nature of some of those learns. And then really importantly, how can they be contextually rendered to the the current environment, and such that it renders itself to what is the contextual nuance of the current environment. And it can't just be a copy paste playback. It's got to sort of it's got to kind of navigate that journey, and that clearly is not straightforward and not easy, but that's got to be a core principle to try and work to. Point 3, again, no technology is ever going to be the panacea here, but cultures and leadership matters, and a lot of leaders frankly still need to understand what the benefits of this discipline well executed are, why it's so integral to continuous improvement, why knowledge is such a kind of key part of forward innovation, frankly how it can become a massive force multiplier if it is actually done properly. And again, no technology is ever going to be the full answer here, but I think it can definitely support that point in so much as it can better educate and inform leaders as to where the benefits are, and actually demonstrate where benefits are accruing. Point 4, Mark's touched on it, which again is aligned to point 3, which is there's got to be an environment of psychological safety. People have to feel recognized, awarded for contributing to this, and that may be conceding clearly error and mistake. That's how truly innovative organizations move forward. And again, it's not by dint of just technology alone going to be unlocked, but technology can help sort of reward and recognize individuals that are contributing to it, to enable the better leaders out there that are proactive in this regard. Point 5, and it's sort of prima facie a completely obvious one, everything should be linked to strategy clearly, but I think done well, a lessons learned enablement can really reinforce that. So of course you have generic kind of aspects that everybody's trying to improve, reduce costs, increase benefit, tighten schedules, of course, generic, but the additional amplification can be to understand the strategy of host organizations and to link lessons learned back to the actual kind of execution of that. And fundamentally that's what leaders are trying to do, is to bring stated intent to life. So lessons learned has got a role to play there. And finally, almost to turn the discipline in and of itself back in on of itself, it's got to be something that perpetually improves. And a full cycle solution, for example, if a lesson is learned, actually can be removed from the register because it's embodied now in an organization's inherent way of working, new standard operating procedures, new playbooks, etc. So this has to have sort of demonstrate constant sort of evolution as well. So if they're the key principles, hand back to Mark to explore how we well, firstly, why we think this is an opportune moment, and then a bit more detail as to what we conceive the forward version to look like.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So yeah, if there are problems with how lessons learned currently learned, why do we think now is the time for something to be done about it? And there are kind of 2 areas of machine learning research that we think are particularly relevant to how we think lessons learned can be done. The first of these, move on to the next slide, is behavior detection. And behavior detection is around identifying the intent of what someone is doing in a more kind of compound, complex way than just a simple log of the activity of what someone's doing. So this is often seen in sort of e-commerce. There's a lot of it in terms of buyer intentions, how long someone stays on a page, what other things, products have they looked at, all things like that, to try and figure out what is their intention, not just looking at it as a string of separate actions. Within method grid, where an example of this might be, say someone clones a grid, well, that by itself doesn't tell us much because there could be 100 different reasons that someone's cloned a grid. But if someone's cloned a grid and we know that their role is they're a project manager and they have similar other grids, and they clone the grid and then they assign it to someone, and then they start, set a start date and start scheduling stages of it. Well, now we can look at that as a sort of compound action of, well, maybe they're deploying a project. And in terms of lessons learned, where this is relevant of, well, if we have a lesson in the lessons learned repository that is related to when a project is being deployed and is being scheduled initially, maybe that's now a good time to play back this lesson. So that's where the sort of behavior detection comes in at both ends of the lessons learned journey. One is, when's the best time to capture a lesson? When's the most relevant time? And two, when's the best time to play back a lesson? When is the relevant person doing the relevant thing where this lesson is going to have maximum impact on the project? And then the next step is natural language processing, which, you know, unless you've sort of been living under a rock for the last year, you undoubtedly will have heard about. And I've sort of said this before, but every time we talk about this, or I do any sort of presentation around natural language processing, I have to update what I say and what the slides are, because it just moves so quickly. You know, even within the last couple of weeks, amid all the sort of OpenAI boardroom drama, there's rumors that they've got a new model they're working on, this Q-star model. But here, this slide just shows a couple of the kind of big natural language processing models that are available at the minute. And these numbers at the bottom are just the 70 billion, 175 billion, 180 billion. These sort of, they're the number of parameters a model has, just the number of numbers that control its behavior, which essentially dictates how much hardware you need, how sort of complicated they can be. And this Llama 2, this is Meta's AI model that they open sourced a couple of months ago. Falcon's another open source one, and GPT 3.5 and 4 are the ones running ChatGPT. I think the important point here in terms of research and in terms of making use of AI within industry is that there are open source models that, in terms of size, are similar in size to these closed source ChatGPT models, and on, you know, there's more released every single week, to sort of Dom's point before, but that on certain tasks can compete with and outperform ChatGPT, which is great news for us, great news for research, great news in general, I would say. So there's the two areas of research. So if we move on, start talking about how we see these fitting in and being used in what we're calling Lessons Learned 2.0. And these are the kind of key eight themes that we see in Lessons Learned 2.0. I'm going to talk about each of them in a bit more detail, and specifically how they address each of the problems that we talked about earlier. To move on to the next. So this first one, and this is a really, really key one, is integrating lessons learned into day-to-day P3M, because as we've said, if the only time you're thinking about lessons learned, if the only time you're capturing a lesson is at the end of a project, the only time you're reviewing them is at the beginning of a project, this huge gap between when it's relevant and when you're talking about it just means the quality of the lessons aren't there. When it's relevant, you're probably not going to remember it. And yeah, this is where we see the behavioral detection really coming in, of capturing when is the best time to record a lesson, when has something happened that is relevant to a lesson, and on the other end of it, the other end of the, you know, we talk about this lessons learned loop, the other side of it, when is the best time to retrieve a lesson, and who is the best person to present the lesson to. The next one is about the lessons learned quality. And this is really where the natural language processing comes into it, both in terms of filtering out the low quality lessons and identifying, you know, the really high quality, this is a specific actionable thing that we can do something with. And then also in terms of identifying when is the best time, you know, what stage of a project, who is the most relevant person that this lesson applies to. So categorizing and tagging lessons. The next one is around the technical enablement of lessons learned. And this is around the sort of UI, UX that we see for lessons learned. So the first point, number 3 there, the ingestion in different forms. This is, I think, a really key one. And it is related to what I was just saying around integration into day-to-day, is if our solution to this was here's this separate system. If you want to record a lesson, you need to go fill in this 20 question form, and it's going to take you half an hour. No one's going to do it. We all know we wouldn't do it. And so the key thing here is there's got to be the technology in place that enables the capturing and playing back of lessons learned to be as quick and as easy and as convenient as possible, so that people will actually do it. And we need to, to Dom, your point earlier of acknowledging the realities. We need to acknowledge the reality that if it's not really convenient, people just aren't going to do it. And then the final one is around the cultural barriers. And again, this is to Dom, your point earlier about the leadership and kind of convincing leaders within the industry that lessons learned is a valuable practice. And this is around quantifying the value of lessons learned. If a lesson has been actioned and we've done something about it, how do we quantify the benefits of that lesson? And part of that is around feedback of people scoring, how valuable the lesson was, but also part of it is quantifying things in terms of, well, we had this project, this stage normally takes a certain amount of time. We actioned this lesson and that cut that time down by 50%, as an example. Fundamentally just to convince people that there is a huge amount of value in prioritizing lessons learned. If we move on, Tom. Thank you. And then this is back to this lessons learned loop again. And this is how we see this working. So again, starting with the lesson capture, bottom left, instead of it being at predefined stages of the project, specific milestones at the end, it's integrated into day-to-day. It's capturing lessons in the moment when they're most relevant. We're filtering out the quality lessons from the irrelevant, vague ones, categorizing and tagging this automatically using that natural language processing so that we know what the lesson's about, who it's relevant to, when it's most relevant, and come back down the other side for the retrieval. It's being played back to the most relevant person at the most relevant time using that behavioral detection. We know when it is most relevant and who it's most relevant to, and we can play it back to them at that relevant time. And this point at the side, the lessons learned systematically embodied into new organizational playbooks. This, I think, is a really, really key point. And I think I tend to focus on, how are we going to technically solve all of these challenges? And this was a really interesting conversation that came out when we were talking about this at our senior user forum last month. Was the ultimate goal of all of this isn't just the playback of a lesson. The ultimate goal of this is incorporating that lesson into your processes so that essentially you can retire the lesson because it's not needed anymore. We don't need to show that lesson to anyone else. We don't need to retrieve it anymore because it's integrated into the process. No one's ever going to make that mistake again. That's the end goal of all of this. So if we move on to the next one, I think we're on to a quick demo, which if you're at the senior user forum, which I think we've got some people watching who were, you will have seen a version of this demo. It's had a few new features since then. So let me take control of the screen. Okay. So this is our, within the dev team at MethodGrid, we use MethodGrid for running our software sprints. So this is the grid we start off a sprint with. It's got various different things for requirements and design of a sprint, for how we go about releasing a sprint. It's got an element for writing a test plan. Here are the things you need to do, some guides for writing a test plan, all that sort of, all the stuff you'd expect. And I'm going to go through that whole sort of lessons learned life cycle within this grid. And the reason I like this example is because this is actually something that happened specifically to me. This was something that when we released a sprint, something went a bit wrong and we captured a lesson. And when we were kind of building this lessons learned prototype, this was the point when we sort of saw how the system processed and handled this lesson. This was the point for me, at least, where I was kind of like, oh, it's like that aha moment of, oh, okay, this, something really interesting is going on here. So we start off with the lesson capture, this behavioral detection of when's the best time to capture a lesson. And this is a fairly simple example of this. As we've talked about, this would be around, there'd be a lot of data that would go into this of what my role is, what I'm currently doing, what project I'm working on, what stage is the project in. Or for just a really simple example, this example's around sentiment analysis. So if I'm just writing some comments about how this sprint is going, if I put something fairly vague, if I just say this is going fine, well done everyone, there's not much to that comment. Nothing happens. There's no, Whereas if I put a comment that says this is a disaster, if I spell disaster right. Why can I not spell the word disaster? If I say this is a disaster and I write that comment, well, and again, this is a fairly simple example, but you can see the system's gone, oh, something's gone wrong. Is there something we can capture as a lesson? And so I'm going to click that and it opens up this lessons learned interface. And the really key point here, what we were just saying about this being integrated into day-to-day practice, is I haven't left the grid. I'm still in the project view. This isn't some separate system where we need to go away and spend 15 minutes capturing a lesson. This is integrated into what I was doing. And just for this demo, I was hoping to be able to show this audio recording, but we don't think it works while I'm presenting because I don't think my microphone will be picked up by the browser. So for now, I'm just gonna type it in. But next time we do this in person, we'll show off some of these other ones because they're quite cool. But for now, I'm just going to type this lesson in. And like I said, this is a genuine, real thing that happened. So I'm going to read it out just in case people can't see it on the screen. After the sprint was released, it's found that some of the change database queries were slow on the production database, which is much larger than the database that was used during testing. When considering what needs to be tested in the test plan, developers should decide whether any changes will require testing on a large database similar in size to the production database. Like I said, genuine thing that happened. We released a sprint. Some bits of it were a bit slow. We captured this as a lesson. So there we go. So at this point in this lessons learned cycle, we've gone up the left side. We've captured the lesson after it prompted us to do so. That lesson has now been processed by the system. It's been categorized. It's figuring out when's the best time to play this back to the relevant person. And again, I want to make the key point about integration into day-to-day practice here, is I haven't left what I was doing. I haven't left the project view. I'm still in the grid. And, around acknowledging the realities of how this is going to work. If this was some separate system I had to go to spend 15 minutes to fill out for, I'm not going to do it. From that being triggered to me just, quickly recording that lesson, that can be 30 seconds. I think that's a really important point here. So let's go back down the other side of this lessons learned cycle. And let's imagine it's 6 months in the future. We're working on a different software sprint. We've all forgotten about the lesson that was captured. We've deployed a new software sprint. We're working on something else. And maybe I'm a different person. I'm not the person who recorded the lesson. I'm just going about my daily work. I'm not thinking about, that lesson that was captured. But when I'm doing something that is relevant, I get this little prompt. And we're coming back down the other side. This is behavioral detection. There's a lesson relevant to what I'm doing. And the system's prompted me to have a look at that lesson. And again, another key point, this is all integrated into the project. I haven't been taken away to some separate system to do this. So the lesson it's given us, when considering what needs to be tested in the test plan, developers should decide whether any changes will require testing on a large database similar in size to the production database. And the first key point to make here is that that's not word for word what I said. There was a lot of kind of surrounding narrative that I put in there. The system has taken out, it's extracted the core of the lesson. And then secondly, what it's done, it's suggested how we integrate this into our process. So it wants us to add this task to check when we're writing a test plan, do we need to test on a large database similar in size to the production database? I'm going to click that. And there we go. It's added it in for us. And this is what I was just talking about as the end goal of a lessons learned, is it's integrated into your process. And here now, we've added it into our process. No one ever needs to be shown that lesson again. We can retire that, because anyone writing a test plan now, they're going to see this task. They're going to, we've learned the lesson essentially, which is ultimately the goal. The other thing to say as well, it's contextually aware of what we're doing. The way this has been worded, it's detected that all of this checklist is kind of worded as questions, the person writing the test plan. And, the natural language processing involved in this is kind of worded it in the same way. It's integrated it into our playback in a way that makes sense. So that's a quick demo of how we see lessons learned working in the future. That whole lessons learned cycle, capturing the lesson at the relevant time, categorizing it with the natural language processing, presenting it to the relevant person at the relevant time, and then closing that loop, retiring the lesson, integrating it into our process.
Great, thanks.
Move on, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So we're just going to before we get to plenary discussion, just talk a little bit about Leap. And again, there's detail on this in the white paper just to give the headlines. And I guess this say up front as well that really important part of what drives us as a team is that we are part of the community that is genuinely helping to facilitate, foster better practice across the industry. And it's the reason why we host our physical senior user gatherings. It's the reason why we do the grid talks, the reason why we produce white papers. It's just to be involved in what has to be a very joined up conversation. We're not going to have the full answer ourselves, but we feel we've got an important role to play. And the reason why we think on this particular topic, and hopefully, Mark's got across why now is genuinely, very, very pivotal moment for this. But from our perspective, well, firstly, we have our platform, it's out there in the world. And I guess what that gives us is the contextual backdrop to all of this topic, where clients are using it to deliver and assure their methodological playbook. As Mark was saying, that kind of gives us the data cues. We know, what kind of flavor of user is on the system. We know what flavor of thematic projects they're involved in. We know where they are in the staging of that endeavor. We know exactly what they're doing now. And that's the ability, therefore, to enable contingent trigger. So, first and foremost, there is a platform, it's live, it's out there, and that's the kind of necessary backdrop. Secondly, we're very lucky to have team members like Mark, that are in a day-to-day job, essentially building out new release, new product on the platform. Of course, as a technology business, that's our bread and butter, is constantly evolving and adding to the product. So, that's our DNA. It's very much the project management that pertains to new technology release, and we happen to have a whole load of skill set that's relevant, particularly in Mark's machine learning AI space. So we're not having to build new capabilities is the fundamental point there. We've got them in-house to start getting into meaningful prototype. And of course, and finally, and probably most importantly, we're hugely privileged to be working with some of the best leader or vanguard innovators out there in our client base. And we know, having spoken to many of you, that many of you are super interested in this topic as well, and keen to stay abreast. And I think it will be that dialogue with leading organizations that are right at the coalface that we need to feed into this as well, particularly from a data natural language model perspective. So if we go to the next slide, I think we feel as a result of those foundations, there's definitely a meaningful endeavor to kick off here. It's innovation. It's not without risk. It's clearly in the R&D bucket, but we think there's a really fighting chance, particularly over this kind of time frame that we're postulating, which is a circa 18-month endeavor with the right partners, that we feel a very, very meaningful end prototype will manifest. In terms of the schedule, I mean, broadly speaking, we are looking at it as a an 18-month endeavor. If you take off the initiate close piece, effectively we're going to go through our very rigorous discipline of broadly 6 circa 2-month sprints, and there's some thematic clumping of the sort of key tech kind of blocks that we definitely need to bring together in very considered fusion for this to kind of work. And hopefully you've got that from that design blueprint there of lessons learned 2.0. But fundamentally, all things about building the large language model, the data ingestion aspects of that. Then you've got the behavioral nudging and the multimedia sort of ingestion point. You've then got the reinforcement learning, human feedback loop, and then finally the sort of the benefit tracking and MI that will inform and educate leaders increasingly down the line as well. So we're going to look at them in integrated sort of streams, but over that kind of sprint cycle. And we feel like at the end of that, there will definitely be we'll be with a fair win, very, very close to a very, very meaningful working prototype. So we go to the next one, if that gives a bit of a flavour as to the timeline, broad timeline. And I should say, looking to kick off probably back end of Q1 2024. We've made application for a number of innovation sort of type funds. We'll see where they are in the next couple of months, and once we've ascertained that sort of funding envelope and had a number of conversations with many of our key clients and other interested parties, will be a point, I think, early, certainly late Q1, early Q2 to kick it off. And clearly, the sort of framing of the benefit of this endeavor, if you just click through them all, Tom, here is in inverse of the problem statement. We feel, you can get to a point where you can kind of contingently trigger both capture and playbook. You can, with natural language models, you have the potential to sort of facilitate the qualitative enhancement point, getting to, closer to first order. You certainly, with natural language processing interface, have the ability to provide much more, powerful, search interface on that model, on that repository. And then finally, it is integrated. This doesn't need to be a sort of standalone system. It takes ages to log into. It's all, flat data structure. It just becomes an effortless kind of seamless part of an overall productivity enablement point. So, it's big picture stuff. There's one more click there probably, Tom, I think, but it's not going to happen overnight, but I think, this is a really exciting moment, and the theoretical benefits of lessons learned and all the discipline around it, which, let's be honest, has largely been not much more than espoused rhetoric. For the first time, really, there's an opportunity for this to become genuinely, real benefit and demonstrably, measurably so. That's the really exciting bit. Be able to systematically see that and get better and better as these models tune. So we go to the final couple of slides, and we'll break out into plenary. Is just to sort of, again, some people have probably seen this. We've got an A3 schematic summary of LEAP. Lessons enabling advanced projects, and what we are looking to bring into that is, well, certainly academia and via Mark's PhD actually in Durham University and our local University Bath, we are in sort of early conversations linking in there, and we sort of think the right number is 4 to 6 kind of very engaged industry partners as well, and a number of those were clearly already chatting to you. But if you're interested in getting involved, you're interested in hearing more, please just drop us a line, either put it in chat now, drop Mark and myself an email, or just info@, and early Q1 will be bringing together the actual kind of engaged parties. So final point, just to go back to the starting objectives, the next slide, Tom, is just on the white paper front. Is again, if you haven't seen it and we've piqued your curiosity, there's a lot more information in that white paper. We would love to get feedback. We always enrich the publications that we push out through this sort of consultation loop, and again, thank you to those that have already fed back. But if you want a copy of the white paper, again, let us know on chat, and Tom will get you a copy. And if you wanted to feedback, please, by the end of really, I guess, well, we're saying Friday the 15th of December will help us push out the final version of that paper in the new year. So a bit of a canter through where we're heading and Project Leap. We've got 10 minutes for any sort of related questions. And again, remember, you've got the sort of the question panel over to the side as well. Neil, thanks for your question. I've just sort of had a look at, might need to have a bit of a one-to-one chat on this to really get at your question. And I, you know, I mean, simply put, fundamentally, MethodGrid for our key clients is a platform. It's a SaaS, you know, platform. Therefore, you know, a tool that's supporting their kind of delivery to an end client. So the strict interpretation of that question, you know, there's not a risk share per se, but you may have a nuance on that question. I'm not fully getting, but happy to pick up a one-to-one. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a few people asking about the white paper. Yeah, if just put it in the chat and we'll send one to you.
Yeah, we can certainly push that out to everybody that's registered on this GRIDtalk. We'll give it a couple more seconds to see if there's any other questions. Otherwise, we can give people a little bit of time back. Thank you, Ben. From Rab, would it be better to focus on data as opposed to lessons? Yeah, Mark, do you want to talk to this point? Because, you know, clearly the tag lesson learned is just, you know, to a degree, an artificial sort of data attribute in and of itself. I guess there are much wider, clearly, implications of tuning, training natural language models. I don't know if you want to talk to.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think there's significantly more data and data of different types that would go into this, especially I think in terms of knowing when is the best time to capture a lesson and to play it back. So one of the interesting conversations we've been having is around Gantt data and sort of project schedules. So, you know, if you've run 20 projects that all have a very sort of similar structure and similar scheduling, it then becomes the data relevant to that is where are the anomalies in this. You know, if a specific project, if a certain stage of it goes on for longer or, you know, is quicker than other similar projects, maybe there's a lesson there that can be captured and then at the relevant point on other projects be surfaced. So certainly there's a lot more data that is relevant to this than just the text of the actual lesson itself. No, that's a great point. That's another comment. Lesson often seems like a pejorative term. Yeah, I think maybe that's part of the cultural barriers we've been talking about.
And yeah, Mark, just to pick up on Rab's point there, I mean, he makes an excellent point in so much as, you know, again, it's a bit of human nature, isn't it? I think that we sort of dwell on the negative bit of that, and, you know, something goes wrong, and, you know, everybody gets into kind of earnest huddle and sort of, you know, how do we never make this happen again? You know, but actually, you know, I think to Rab's point, the bigger opportunity probably is reinforcing success when things are done well, and, you know, we've made a productivity jump forward. How does that get reinforced, shared? And certainly this discipline, you know, done well, and with the behavioral nudging detection aspects that are coming through is absolutely as opposite for, you know, for that aspect. We're not certainly from our side focusing on the something's gone wrong, gap spotted, close it. It's success reinforcement as much as anything.
Yeah, I'd say we were just talking about the scheduling data. You know, there's two ways that I normally can go. One is this stage of this project seems to have overrun, what's gone wrong. The other way is you've done this a lot quicker than this normally happens. Is there anything you've done differently that could be shared? Yeah, so there's definitely a positive to it as well.
Yeah, and Neil also touching on it on the questions in that, yeah, the other really obvious corollary of this is in the realm of just risk management generally. I mean, fundamentally that's what Lessons Learned is seeking to do, is to clearly sort of minimize delivery risk. So yeah, Neil, totally. I think in some ways, whilst it's super exciting, I guess we have the challenge of sort of not trying to go too broad, before we kind of demonstrate value in certain kind of capability kind of confinement, but not because we can't see the much broader application of the natural language model piece particularly. Yeah, no, Steph, thank you. I mean, just sounds like we should just very happy just drop myself an email. We'd grab some time to talk if we can be of any help. And my colleague Tom will just make sure you've got contact details to do so. Are any others coming in? No, I think well, hopefully we've at least kind of whet people's appetite for this whole area. But fundamentally, the technology in its nascent stage is potentially we feel able to really be there's a seismic shift that can potentially come about in some of these kind of key disciplines. There's a whole lot of work to be done to actually build meaningful prototype. It's one thing talking about it conceptually to get it to kind of work in working kind of piece. But yeah, we feel very privileged to be sort of part of the community that potentially can sort of meaningfully take this forward. So yeah, if you want to jump on that bus with us, we would love to chat. Any other thoughts that come back? Anything else from sort of getting hold of the white paper? As everybody knows that speaks to us, we love that dialogue. Please share in your thoughts, and there'll definitely be future grid talks on this topic as LEAP starts to get closer to being a meaningful initiative. I think we're going to close it there. Mark, thank you as always for your expert contribution to the topic. Thank you everybody for your engagement. And yeah, look out for the final grid talk of the 2023 series coming up in December. But otherwise, we'll close the call there. Wish everybody good days and weeks. Cheerio.
Thanks, everyone.